And we're live. Welcome back, everyone. Onan here. I got Midnight Philosopher in the studio with me. How are you, Midnight?
I'm doing fine, thanks. Happy Easter.
Yeah, you too. As we were talking about off before we went live, I've got some hopefully much better audio, definitely different going on. So maybe hopefully I sound taller, thinner, and sexier, both to you guys and to my wife. So
Pretty sure if Ellen Holloway were listening, you'd be an occasion for sin.
oh wow, that's a high bar. All right.
Yeah,
Ching.
she might actually start complaining about NFP.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's not get too carried away here, but one can always hope.
Yeah,
How was your Easter? How was the Holy Week and all that?
it was pretty good. It's visited the home parish somewhere in the West Coast, and it was good to reconnect with a lot of familiar faces. And yeah, there were definitely like some moments of like consolation. I think that especially the reflection and the seven last words. Like what there's a visiting deacon that sort of was alternating with a pastor, and some of his kind of reflections in the seven last words were very like very consoling and full of hope, and kind of emphasized God's love and mercy. But there was also another priest. Sorry.
Liberal parish.
I know what. Well, don't worry, because we didn't stay sunshiny too long.
Got teaser, huh?
There was another there was another priest, very nice guy. I have nothing against him personally. We get along just fine, and he's done a lot for my family. But when he gets on that pulpit, man, he really goes heavy in the suffering and the fear and loathing. So it was balanced. So we didn't stray too far away from trad land.
Okay, well that's good to know. Get yourself some graces built up before you come
Yeah.
waste them away over on live streaming with Onan.
Exactly. But yeah, it was good. It was overall it was good. What about yours? How was the tail end of Easter, or tail end of Lent leading into Easter?
It was good. I was ready for Lent to be over.
Mhm.
I don't know what your so this is my Lenten. It's been my Lenten I guess mortification for the last couple of years.
Mhm.
Um, so when I was in the seminary, we had to do Christian prayer, which is the a condensed. Well, it's part of the office readings that priests do.
Mhm.
So it's typically morning prayer, evening prayer, and night prayer.
Mhm.
So like as a seminarian, you're expected to, not like bound under pain of sin, but you're required to do
Mhm.
morning prayer, evening prayer, and night prayer in the seminary. And so I kind of enjoyed Christian prayer. And then I stopped doing it after I left seminary, but every so often, like especially during Lent, I would um take that up as just a little different prayer as opposed to the rosary and stuff that I normally do.
Mhm.
But the last couple of years, it's been a real slog because the Old Testament readings uh, dig into a version of God that I personally struggle with now as compared
Mhm.
to when I was a trad, and in the words of Aquinas, gleefully relishing the downfall of the wicked.
Yeah.
And so there are parts of the Old Testament that are included in Christian prayer that are a real, um, what do I say, stumbling block for me, I think.
Mhm.
And so I don't do it except during Lent, in part because it is kind of it's not a fun process, but I do it. I try to make the most of it, and most of it's good. But there's a few readings in there that just I don't know. I really struggle to relate to that
Mhm.
version of God now that I'm no longer a trad. But um, so that's what I did. So I'm glad that's done. So I'm glad I don't necessarily have to do that
Mhm.
now. And then the other thing I'd given up watching YouTube during the week, so I was binging on Sundays to catch up on all my YouTube channels that I follow. But
Mhm.
now I can.
Yeah. So was it like 12 hours of Christopher West yesterday?
Well, no, I watch that stuff because that's a penance.
Oh,
But
okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
the fun channels, the stuff that I don't do for this channel,
Mhm.
I put off until Sunday. So that's actually was kind of a nice way to do the week.
That's cool.
Mhm.
Nice. Yeah.
So yeah, so I was glad to have it done, and we did. I did not make it to Good Friday. I actually had to work um, on Good Friday because my calendar did not get updated, and I had a um, a customer appointment get scheduled before I had blocked off the afternoon, so I was not able to. But we did Holy Thursday, and then we did the Easter Vigil, which was nice and beautiful, but it's um I had I basically held a 4-year-old the whole time. We fell asleep at first, but wouldn't lay in the pew. So I sat through a lot of the Easter Vigil, but it was good.
Yeah. Oh, you must have you must have big guns now carrying your kid.
Fortunately, when my wife, I was telling Jonah last night, we were watching WrestleMania together,
Hmm.
and I was saying that when my wife is forced into a corner and has to compliment me, she always comments that I have big arms, which I do, big farmer arms. So it comes in handy when you gotta kind of carry sleeping kids around a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah. So anyway, so you're back home with your family, your mom or whatever.
Yeah, kind of at the end of the school year, wrapped up grad school, and yeah, just kind of spending time with my mom and helping out with stuff at home, reconnecting with the childhood parish. So it's been pretty good. Definitely, yeah, definitely. Well, it's been good, but also like some pretty stern reminders of the rather severe elements, kind of like along the lines of like the Old Testament readings you're referring to, and kind of like the certain trad element that shows up in your comment sections on both channels.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always I don't know what's no refreshing isn't the right word, but it's pretty sobering.
Yeah. Well, that's actually kind of a nice segue to talk about the passing of our Holy Father. Pope Francis died this morning, I guess.
Yeah, that was quite. Yeah, I woke up to my mom. Well, I think I'd seen the headlines last night at 1 p.m.
Yeah,
Well, or so sorry, not 1 p.m.
yeah,
1 a.m.
yeah.
like Pacific time, and then yeah, I woke up to my mom kind of saying that the Pope had passed away. Yeah, that's huge news for us Catholics, and apparently according to Twitter, which after Lent I'm finally back on. But yeah,
Nice
it
to be
seems to
back.
be a big piece of news for lots of people. Catholic and non-Catholic.
Uh, Francis, I think we can all agree that he, I don't know if polarizing figure is the right word, but a lot of people had strong opinions about him. I would say almost more
Mhm.
so than even Benedict and John Paul, but I'm not sure. Maybe I'm just
I
too
think,
many years of
yeah,
elapsed.
I think you're right. I mean, I think Pope John Paul certainly had an element of theatricality, and I think that I think he did spend some time as a drama teacher or something, right? Something like that. I know he was involved in theater, and I think that kind of charisma certainly manifested in his papacy. But I think also Pope John Paul seemed like he wasn't really the type to court controversy. I think he very much was just compatible with the spirit of his time, and he, especially in the West where there was a strong anti-communist sentiment. So I think Pope John Paul's papacy was just really well timed, and I think he was really in agreement with the majority of people. And Pope Benedict certainly had his controversial moments, just because.
Mm,
Well, I think maybe the world had gotten more liberal in some ways, and he stayed somewhat traditional, but he was also very introverted, I would say.
mm.
Very soft spoken and introverted guy. But yeah, I think Pope Francis had no qualms just speaking his mind, even when it got him in trouble.
You know, it's funny because so JP2 was Pope all my life
Hmm.
as long as I can remember, and through my revert
Hmm.
years as a teenager, and then I'm trying to remember when Benedict became Pope.
2005, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
2005.
So I was I was full on trad towards the end of JP2's pontificate, and if I had one criticism of JP2 at that time, that he was too liberal, right? I mean, that was,
Hmm.
of course, every pope was going to be too liberal by trad standards, but
Hmm.
you know, we it was it was very easy as a trad to overlook all the good things that JP2 had done and
Hmm.
just focus on the fact that, well, he's still a no sort of liberal or whatever,
Hmm.
um, and then so in 2005, I was no longer actively I wasn't a card carrying trad, but I still had a lot of trad sensibilities, and so Benedict was kind of that full package. Like, right, he was the old school, follow the law, apply the law approach, and so I remember being super excited that
Mhm.
we were moving back towards tradition and following the rules and all that. And then
Mhm.
by the well, when did he? I mean, his stepping down was quite a shock, but I was, you
Yeah, it
know,
was early 2013, I think. Yeah, I remember these years very well because, Pope John Paul passed away the year I started high school, and then Pope Benedict stepped down the year I ended my undergraduate, so
yeah,
those are pretty easy for me to sort of bookmark.
yeah. Well, I I feel like I was so when so when Francis took over, I would say I was still more or less a trad. I hadn't been to the Latin Mass in quite some time, and mostly because it just didn't fit our family real
Mhm,
well. But I was, you know, I was still very um, conservative and traditional in pretty much all of my thinking and approaches. And if I had my way, I probably would have been going to the Latin Mass and stuff like that. And so Francis was, of course, felt like complete opposite direction of it felt like we had lost everything we had gained
mhm,
under Pope Benedict. And but I was starting to have um cracks in my armor, if you will. I was starting to be like, because the trouble for me, one of the reasons I eventually just kind of escaped from Tradistan is that um we just kind of looked at Vatican II as this aberration, and we just gotta, like, as a hiccup, bump in
mhm,
the road. We just gotta get back to the way, the glory days
yeah,
before Vatican II. And then I was starting to understand that I had to either, if I wanted to stay Catholic and be Catholic, I had to embrace, even if it felt very uncomfortable, Vatican II, and recognize that if the church is who I believe it is, it's there's something there that I have to embrace, even if I don't necessarily want to. And so it kind of Francis kind of came at that time where I was intellectually sort of recognizing that I needed to do the difficult thing, which is kind of let go of traditionalism
mhm,
and be like, okay, I'm going to be vulnerable here, Lord. And so, but I was still skeptical, but he kind of came during that time in my life where I was trying to um, be receptive to what the Holy Spirit was trying to do in the, with the Second Vatican Council and the aftermath of it. And
mhm,
um, I don't know. When Francis originally came out and he picked his name, I was like, okay, maybe this is maybe this is it. Uh,
mhm,
but he was such a, I don't know. It seemed like he'd say one thing one day, and I'm like, okay, and then he'd say something just completely off the wall the next day, and
mhm,
I kind of grew tired of the, I don't know, just I couldn't peg the guy down, like, and so I quite I'll have to admit I really kind of stopped following his pontificate after a while because I just didn't feel like I could really take seriously anything he said, because it felt like it was so scattered a lot of the time.
mhm. Yeah, I can definitely understand that. Maybe one of the things that could be frustrating about Pope Francis is that, and this is, I'm not making a value judgment in either direction, but
Mhm.
he was very unscripted, and I think that's why, like you kind of rightly observed, that made him a bit of a loose cannon
Mhm.
when he spoke off the cuff. And I think when you compare him to the previous two popes, I'm not saying that the previous two popes were robotic or anything, but they were certainly more careful with their language. And
Mhm.
then also you look at the whole culture of Catholic apologetics and how every word and every phrase is measured so that they don't
Yeah,
accidentally, you look at the Trent Horns and the Matt Frads, they're
yeah,
very careful about how they speak about everything. And even Christopher
yeah,
West, I think like you guys always comment on, they always kind of resort to the same cliches or the same kind of assessment of their typical topics. But Pope Francis, I think there was, for better or for worse, there was a great sincerity about him. But then that also did maybe it came at the cost of clarity,
Yeah, yeah,
and that I think that could be a good thing in the sense that it leads to you know difficult conversations to seek clarification and to point out holes in the logic, but then it could also threaten like the cohesion of the whole in a way.
yeah. I just for me, like every time he uttered something, there was this sort of this very predictable response where the let's say the Taylor Marshalls of the world would take it in the most extreme way as well, that's heretical. And in some ways, he would say things that sounded heretical in comparison to something that, was said at some council 400 years ago.
Hmm.
But I'm like, well, that can't be what he meant, right? I mean, so, but then on the other hand, it was always like, well, they were trying to like, well, that's not really what he meant. Here's what he tried to
Hmm.
say. So he came across to me, he seemed sloppier than sincere to me. That was sort of
Hmm.
the flavor I got from him, is he just seemed to be, you know, I'm yeah, I'm hardly uh, what I would say, traditionalist who loves
Hmm.
black and white rules and stuff. But there is something to be said for precision. Like, say what you mean. Like, don't make it ambiguous, because, like, as Jonah 2.0 said, um,
Well,
I don't
mhm.
know. Like, I never figured out if he was purposely ambiguous about things or if he was just kind of sloppy. But it felt to me like the Pope, of all
Mhm.
people, ought to be a little more precise so that it's clear what they're actually trying to communicate. And that's the one thing that I kind of grew tiresome
Yeah.
of Pope Francis, is I just never could tell if he was, being, like I said, sensitive or merciful, or just kind of a sloppy thinker. I mean, I assume he was a pretty bright guy, but
Mhm.
I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah. I definitely appreciate Jonah's, yeah, he's come to think of it as merciful ambiguity, but I understand, like, the concerns about that, and it's almost like I don't mean this to speak ill of Pope Francis. I mean, I really did like him and I respected him, but I think when you are kind of ambiguous, there's a certain kind of spirit of playing politics about that,
Mhm.
which maybe it's not the most it's not really something that you look for in clergy. You would hope that they are above playing politics and above being overly concerned with optics. So
Mhm.
I completely understand that frustration. Maybe another suspicion I have with Pope Francis, and I can't see inside his mind and his heart, but uh, I sometimes suspect that even though the way he spoke, the manner in which he spoke was kind of off script, I think he also understood the gravity of his office as Pope, and he knew that he couldn't make any official changes, but maybe he wanted to cause enough of a commotion so that people would start talking about some of the difficult things. I know I think a lot of his controversial statements were always around, um, homosexuality, marriage, communion to divorced couples, and those seem to be among his hot topics. And maybe he was sort of like making these maybe these double entendres or these ambiguous statements so that it would stir conversation. He didn't want to. He could only rock the boat so much
Mhm.
in an unofficial capacity because of the overbearing weight of tradition. And I think before we can even consider new doctrinal developments, the conversations have to be started. So maybe being a provocateur was something of his plan. I don't know. That's me just thinking off the cuff. That's not really based on evidence. That's just my instinctive kind of analysis.
Yeah, I'm open to that idea, and not to get too
Mhm.
political here, but it sort
Mhm.
of reminds me a little bit of the Trump phenomenon, because he would and does these things that, on the one hand, looks like it could be just like 4D chess, like, oh, he's just 2 steps ahead of everyone,
Mhm.
and then but on the face it looks just like nuts, really. But maybe, like, maybe this guy is just so far ahead of us that we can't see the genius behind it, and I similar to Trump, I sort of grew over time, came to conclude that there wasn't necessarily some deep strategy behind these things that Francis is doing, and it looked just like someone that was just kind of sloppy in how they
Mhm.
spoke. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Like I said, we'll never really know. I don't think, but I would like to think that um, Francis was in fact a that there was some grand purpose behind the mess, if you will, that he was creating. But um, I'm very much open to the idea that he was just kind of a scattered guy that didn't really think things through. And I don't know that that's uh, I, I, if that's the case, I don't know that's getting us any closer to where we want to be. And it sort of um, plays into the trad's hand that I mean,
Yeah, maybe Pope Francis's greatest sin, may he rest in peace. Maybe his greatest sin is that Taylor Marshall made a career out of criticizing him.
yeah. Well, and I said on Twitter today, I was like, my biggest criticism of Francis was his crackdown on the TLM.
Mhm.
Not because I don't think some of those people deserved it, but I thought it was a real strategic blunder because it just it didn't help. Like the people that go to the Latin Mass are going to go to the Latin Mass, and it kind of forced people into schism. But it really, I think, I don't know, it validated a lot of the trads feelings about him in the worst possible way, I think. Um but I don't know. I mean, I guess I try not to be a Monday morning quarterback too much on this stuff where I mean, I'm just glad I'm not the guy that has to figure that stuff out. So I don't
Yeah, for
I try
sure.
to be I try to be um what I would say deferential to him as much as I can, but I just I don't know. I don't know what to make of Francis's pontificate, and maybe we'll really have a better sense once we have the next pope to kind of compare him to. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I was speaking to the whole TLM crackdown. Even though I myself am pretty rigorously critical of trads on Twitter and in the YouTube comment section. I mean, I think I have to side with you in the sense that like it was a strategic blunder to crack down, and I think there were so many innocent casualties of that they don't really get involved in all of this church politics stuff, and they just like the Latin Mass as their preferred style of worship, and they sort of got they got caught up in that whole train wreck, even though they don't have any, they're not Tim Gordon or Taylor Marshall. They're not outspoken in that sort of disrespectful, inflammatory way, and they sort of got caught up in all of this conflict. Um, I don't know if this might be a clumsy analogy, but maybe the whole TLM crackdown is similar to the COVID lockdowns. Like it should have been more targeted. That your high risk areas would be locked down, or in this case, your sort of higher risk TLM communities where there's evidence that there's some kind of schismatic attitudes and harmful attitudes,
Mhm.
and maybe there should have been some element of like small government church as opposed to big government. Like maybe just encourage the bishops to monitor the TLMs in their diocese and just make sure that the culture in these TLM communities is healthy. There's no spiritual abuse going on. But I think to do such a big sweeping top down TLM crackdown was probably not the right call.
No, I definitely agree with that, and that's I think kind of my struggle is because while I think there were elements or versions of the TLM communities that were you know probably needed to have their knuckles hit a little bit,
Mhm.
but for the most part, and um, as much as I pick on the trads, I recognize that I mean, compared to what, like, compared to 90% of the people that are in your average Nova Sordo parish,
Mhm.
um, I don't know that they're really the future of the church. Most of them are aging out. Their kids don't practice the faith, and I mean, people are excited about the traditional Latin mass and are having large families. They are going to be the future of the church, whether we like it or not. And I think we need to just acknowledge that. And so it just felt a little bit like shooting ourselves in the foot. Like,
For
why would
sure.
we alienate the one part of the church that has kind of life in it?
Yeah, and in a way that even if maybe the concerns were valid, like maybe the intent was to de-radicalize them. I think it had the opposite effect. Now they feel, because they feel like they're the victims and they're the oppressed class. If
Mhm.
anything, it's going to encourage more radicalization because they feel like they're up against some version of the Antichrist, or at least some kind of anti-Christian adjacent infiltration, to borrow Taylor Marshall's language. So you're
Yeah.
right. I think it was the wrong strategy, even though the concerns might have been valid. And I think maybe this is like some cliche hippy dippy kind of speech, but even if we do like have legitimate criticisms of traditionalism, I think we should still um, extend some kind of olive branch and hopefully keep the lines of communication open so that we understand where they're coming from better, but hopefully we encourage them to be open to listen to very legitimate concerns about hardliner traditionalism. Because I think the moment we sort of shut off communication and we're just each other's enemies within the church, it's kind of just bad news for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. My biggest worry about traditionalism is, quite frankly, well, it's the stuff that I talk about all the time. Is
Hmm.
I mean, I think if they focused on the liturgy and the traditional values and some of the other things, uh, fine. But I really am nervous about slipping into the not to use our good friend's name in vain, but the John Farrell approach to um, marriage and all that.
Hmm.
I really I really think that's a not the road that the church ought to be going down.
Yeah,
So that
yeah.
worries me a little bit because it's I don't know, as far as I'm concerned, it's already hell enough trying to live under, Humani Vitae, much less trying to go back to the, um, let's say, Casti Conui version or whatever.
100%. And kind of tying that concern into like some of the things I heard during the Triduum services. It is like the people that are more of a conservative traditionalist mindset, they really do seem to, if they don't hyper focus on sex, they'll manage to tie in sexual sin to like every sermon, even if it feels like they're shoehorning it in.
Yeah,
I mean, and it's always tied with, uh the same talking points about being in a state of mortal sin, be like angering God, endangering your soul and stuff. And I think it really does mess up the journey to marriage and the journey to family life for many. I'm not saying it messes it up for all, because maybe there are some people that are blessed. They're in a state where they're just ready to get married. They're in a place where they can be gung ho about having kids, and maybe it works out for them. And I think we should absolutely support that. But for some people, it's just life is a bit messier, and it takes them a while to get there. And you don't want them getting married and having kids because there's this anxiety and
yeah,
dread about not
yeah,
checking every box. And I think you do create a really a bad environment for the families themselves, but it also I think that's why you have a lot of people leaving the church or switching denominations, or getting this kind of spiritual burnout, because that's the element of traditionalism that is very harmful, when you can't pursue the true, the good, and the beautiful out of a genuine
mhm,
spiritual growth, but it is like you're triggering a kind of fight or flight response at an existential level.
yep. Well, I think, Jonah 2.0 has just offered the grand solution.
Mhm.
I'll offer up the no sordo, so we'll all go back to Latin mass, and in exchange
Yeah.
we get other acts. I think we just solved 95% of the church's problems, and the rest of it's just financials. So there you go. I think that's it. That's all we gotta do. Other
I think,
acts.
yeah, I think this might be a conspiracy music theory, but I think that the best Gregorian chant singers have empty balls. So,
That's right. God, jeepers.
so yeah, I'm down with that formula.
Okay. So, oh, he's not happy with it, so he wants his he said he wants his, I gotta go find his comment. He wants the dictator pope. So what do you think? So what's gonna be who's gonna be the heir to Pope Francis? I mean, he wasn't pope that long.
Mhm.
But the my uneducated sense of people seems to be that he made enough cardinals that kind of just purely by numbers, it's
Mhm.
likely that we're going to end up with someone far closer to Francis than let's say Benedict, but I don't know. I didn't see Benedict coming and I didn't see Francis coming, so I kind of just I give up
Yeah,
trying to
I think, like yeah, I also don't know. I know that I've heard of Cardinal Tagle, who's, I think, from the Philippines, that he's favored, and then I think the more conservative people are hoping for Cardinal Sarah. But yeah, it is one of those things that I also don't know. A lot of people, like, by the numbers, you're right. Pope Francis has certainly influenced,
Mm.
or has certainly, he's appointed cardinals of influence that lean in his direction. But I hope it's not sacrilegious to speculate that. I mean, I think the traditional belief is, we trust that the Holy Spirit guides these elections, but I think there's also a human element in the church that does kind of think politically, um, and there might be an element, and I'm not in a position to say how much of that is or is not inspiration from the Holy Spirit, but I think there is a certain element of politics when they're I mean, the human element within the church, they kind of have to pick their candidates who is right for the times. I know I came across one secular commentator. This was just in the context of talking about American politics, but he sort of had a little brief tangent talking about the death of Pope Francis. And from his secular perspective, he suspects that we're going to have a very conservative pope, because it lines up with the relative strengthening of right wing politics, and so it might make sense for the church to also pick a more conservative leaning pope. That's just his take. I personally really don't know, but I could see that if some of the cardinals are thinking more in political terms, like who fits with the times, who might uh, be more effective at dialoguing with various international leaders if most leaders are starting to lean a bit more right.
Well, and even if it's someone that, like kind of like my comments before, like the TLM or not, like that's where the growth is happening in the church. That's where all the big families are coming from. And so um, you look at at least the most noticeable sort of parishes that I go to, it's it's 75% people that are not going to be in those pews 10 years from now, not because they're leaving, because they're going to be they're going to be buried outside. So um I just think from a pragmatic standpoint, I think they have to come to grips with um the fact that the growth is happening primarily in the TLM, or if not that, certainly in the more conservative, reverent Nova Sordo parishes. I think that is for sure. And this is a good segue because you know, um, one of the things that has helped me in my own personal struggles, let's say in the last, I'd say I last 3 to 5 years, has been opening up to the fact that there's a bigger human element, a bigger organic element in the church. Maybe political is the right way to say it, but there's more human baked in to the church body than we previously I previously thought, or I think traditionalists like to think, where everything is just this unblemished, unquestionable fiat from God, when maybe it's a little more nuanced than that. And I that actually helped save my faith to some degree because um uh, I was able to move past some things that would otherwise be great, I think, intellectual and moral stumbling blocks for me.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with that realization of the human element in the church, and I think it really does. I think acknowledging that is one of the big differences between having this sort of rigid faith versus a faith that has a little bit of flexibility and is less likely to break, because you just have to understand that, I guess even looking at the various Bible stories, if we agree with, or with we accept that belief that God works through the messiness of human affairs, and the church is no different. The church is not exempt from that messiness, that human messiness, um and kind of the funny contradiction, which we sort of maybe just have to take with a light heart, is that the same theologians that tell us about the flawed sense of reason and the flawed emotions of the human condition are also relying on their own flawed reason and flawed emotional condition to make those judgments. So
Mhm.
it's kind of inescapable. We could
Yeah.
certainly make all of the criticisms we want about human nature and human reason and concupiscence, but the people making those judgments and preaching those sermons are not exempt from those very same struggles that us in the peasant class are struggling with.
Yeah, and I think sort of related to that is I've also, as I've tried to mature in my sort of intellectual approach to things and my moral things is to not, I don't know, just I guess I've tried to trust a little more my own instincts and strong feelings about things and not just capitulate to, something said by some great saint or doctor of the church, whether it's Saint Alphonsus or Augustine or whatever. Not that I disregard what they have to say, but I think what I've tried to do is to temper what they said and look at it like these were imperfect humans trying to make the best sense out of limited, the circumstances they have, but they were, just by definition limited by what they could do. We've learned a lot. We've advanced a lot. We've got body of information now that they didn't have access to that there's a certain thing that there's certain things that we have the ability to pull into the mix that they didn't have. And so I think, you know, without getting arrogant about it, I think we need to be a little more, um, uh, put a little more stock in our own experiences, in just a little less kind of deferential treatment to what someone said just because they happen to have, a liturgical day named after them and some shrine built in their honor.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good balanced approach. In a way, it's too easy to one. You could turn your brain off and just accept everything as
Mm.
that's a divine directive. Don't question it. You could also turn to the opposite extreme and just throw everything they said into the fire, and it's not worth considering them because they're a bunch of fanatics. But I think that middle way is more productive. It's like these are still great minds of the church. They had their own struggles, and they've left us this wealth of their reflections, and it's kind of like time travel. We can engage in dialogue with these ideas. We don't have to accept every single thing, but we neither do we have to reject every single thing. We sort of have to find the best and leave the rest.
Yeah. I, I'd like to, if you want, I'd like to discuss Pickens' comments here because I don't know. So Pickens says, Craig, the big families among English speaking Americans might be trads, but I'm not sure that applies globally. Latin America, et cetera, packed churches and aren't trads, plus trad kids often defect. I mean, um, yeah, I don't claim to be an expert. I don't claim to be an expert on much of anything, but certainly not how the rest of the world looks at things, although I'm trying to do that. I saw something, I think my wife posted something about how France, of all places, which is, at least recently historically been just a graveyard of Catholicism,
Hmm.
uh, had like this enormous number of people join the faith, join the church over Easter. And so I think this is all a very fluid and dynamic situation. Um, and I could be completely wrong about this, but my sense is that in, let's say, Latin America, is I think there's still a number of decades behind, let's say, the U.S. or maybe Western Europe. In terms of, I think it's still culturally expected that you go to church and stuff like that. But I see it when these people, are in parishes around me, um, they seem to quickly lose that. In a similar way that I think, you look at the American church in the 1950s versus the 1970s. Look at 20 years it went to go, from this, Taylor Marshall view of the world, so to speak, to the 1970s. It didn't take long for all that kind of culturally reinforced, um, I want to say, norms to really be unwound. And I kind of wonder if they simply haven't caught up, so to speak. Only because I'm not sure that I think there may be as much cultural impetus for that as opposed to the some what I was saying, genuine or unusual fervency of the faith. Now I could be wrong. I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here.
I think you definitely have something. I think in a way it's very similar, and like much of my family is from the Philippines, so and culturally, because the colonial influences in both Latin America and the Philippines are both Spain, and to an extent Portugal as well, but mainly Spain. And I think you do see a similar type of Catholicism, that it's so like inextricably bound to the culture.
Yeah.
And yes, there's certainly still much of the same taboos that you talk about on both of your channels, and then a lot of the trad theology, but it's a little bit less technical and legalistic. It is much more about upholding the culture, upholding the
Mhm.
aesthetic.
Yeah.
And you do get, at least my understanding and my observation is, you do get a lot of Catholics that are genuinely like believing Catholics, and they do have a genuine love of Jesus, and a desire to be part of the community. But there's also, they're maybe not as consistent with going to every Sunday mass.
Mhm.
Um, it's less about the legal technicalities, and it's more about, it is a little bit hazy and a little bit less defined. Although they carry it with them in their day-to-day life in some way, whether it's they say the rosary, they say their chaplet of divine mercy, their houses are full of different little statues and prayer cards and stuff. They have all of that, but it's also not really, it's not as heavily legalistic. They're not watching every corner for an occasion of sin necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, that still exists, but it's just so uneven. The level of enforcement. If I'm going to make the assumption that maybe in Latin America it shares a lot of those similarities as in the Philippines, it's like the level of enforcement of the technicalities is less rigorous, but there is a kind of cultural fervency about it. And maybe one of the upsides is when these folks do go to church, it emerges from a genuine feeling of love, and like, my life's been going really well and I haven't made time to go to church. I should go to church and receive communion and say an extra rosary. It's less like, oh, I might commit mortal sin, I gotta go to church. It's like, it's all of the fervency with not necessarily as much of the technical stuff.
Yeah. And I think that was sort of the, kind of going back to when Francis became Pope. Is I I had this thought or hope that that was sort of what he might bring to the pontificate, which was that sort of that, um, almost a Latin American fervency without all of the trad baggage.
Hmm.
And maybe he did. I don't know. What I had in mind isn't what I saw play out. But again, I I sort of quickly lost interest in Roman politics, just because I know I got enough of my own problems to worry about. I really didn't spend a lot of time analyzing what the Pope said today or whatever. But it doesn't appear to me, whether he was trying to or not, that Francis brought that to the church. But that's what I had hoped, and I would like to see that brought to the church. I would like to see a renewed fervency for the best elements of Catholicism without being um tethered to this you know old, just like you said, the stuff that goes along with the traditionalist, scrupulous, legalistic approach to things.
Yeah, I think kind of tying it into your usual topics too, about like, um if you don't follow the Christopher West model, your soul is immediately in danger, and it's sometimes it feels like it's really a thin line. You know, the state of your salvation is always, it's almost always precarious 24/7, and it, like you often joke, it like turns marriage into an occasion for sin.
Yeah.
Um, but I wonder, I think a really good balanced approach would be like a, like if I, and I think Jonah 2.0 has made this point in the Discord too, like if we soften the distinctions between mortal and venial sin and
Mhm.
take more of a growth mindset, like we're not going to discard our ideals about, you know, having a large family, always being open to life, but what if we treated, you know, that kind of growth in the spiritual mindset kind of like hitting the gym, you know? Maybe you're new at deadlifts and you might be starting with the barbell, which is like 45 pounds, right? But after a few sets of that, you're not going to add like 45 plates on either end. You sort of have to incrementally grow. And I think if we could make a space, especially for people that, you know, their marriage circumstances, their economic circumstances, and all of the stuff they face might be different, they might not be able to master the Christopher West model. And God forbid they want to master the Ellen Holloway model, but you know, maybe there are those people. But you know, I think if we could almost like ease them into that and have some flexibility rather than every decision is a matter of spiritual life and death, you know?
Well, as loath as I am to give Jonah 2.0 too much credit, I think you're right there. I think it certainly represents, I think, a better alternative to the Father Ripperger approach to things, which,
Hmm.
you know, I gotta, since we got Father Ripperger here, I think I gotta,
You got to
uh,
bust out some of the special
yeah,
things.
can I play with some of my toys?
Go for it, man. Yeah.
Sex crazed world. In a sex crazed world
Exactly.
I got some good. Here's another one.
is absolutely bananas.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
all. Here's
nice.
this might be the most
Mhm.
Father Ripperger of all things here.
There's certain ways of engaging in the conjugal act which are proper and ones which are not.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah, and he's a pro at that, I'm sure, from experience, you know?
I, if I remember doing it with Jonah, I'm gonna have kind of a robot movements
Mhm.
going on because that's what it feels like. But I got some good Christopher West stuff too. I'm just waiting for a
Yeah,
sort of
for
organic opportunity to drop.
yeah, yeah.
Those are good.
But those Father Ripperger clips are pretty good. And you're right, you know, I hadn't, I know I've always referred to him as cold and
Mm.
frigid, but I think the robot thing is actually spot on. I feel like if we were gonna have a Tradcath version of like Siri, I think Father Ripperger's voice is perfect for that.
Well, funny enough, when I was setting up these sound clips on my board, you can color them,
Mhm.
and that one I made blue because it's just cold and blue, just like Father Ripper.
Nice. Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, I don't know what to I I don't know. I'm for better or for worse, I don't have a huge vested interest in what happens in the next with the next pope because like I said, I'm not super excited about a Pope Francis 2.0, but I'm also not you know, I would, as much as I love someone like Cardinal Burke, who I think is one of the most sincerely virtuous people I've ever known. I don't get excited at all about the idea of him um, kind of setting the tone for the church because it would just turn up the temperature on the stuff that I struggle with in my own personal life.
I think so too. Like, I haven't paid too much attention to Cardinal Burke. I mean, all the little clips I've seen of him, he seems to be a very soft-spoken, you know, everything is pretty carefully considered when he makes his addresses or he writes something. So he's clearly a very thoughtful person, and he seems very sincere in his, you know, his mission as a cardinal and as someone serving the people. But for sure, and I think the Onan special would be struck from the menu forever. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it would be the ultimate, like, lightning bolt in the UCM project.
yeah. Just get me through menopause, and then if they want to have a trad priest, fine. Then it's the next generation's
Yeah.
problem to deal with. But I don't know.
Are you hinting that, like, once the Mrs. Onan, hits menopause, you'll retire and we'll never see you again.
Well, I mean, it's possible I'll lose some of the edge because but I've also seen enough of life and marriage to assume that there's going to be its own set of problems that I don't think Onan is going anywhere
Yeah,
soon. Yeah, I think that oasis that I um, have sort of thought was there for us poor NFP couples is truly
mhm.
just a mirage, or it keeps moving. So I don't think there's any danger of Onan retiring anytime soon.
That's good. Maybe you have to rebrand UCM to Uncharted Catholic Menopause.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, I don't know. You know, and I do sort of wonder if maybe we are uh maybe we're just never supposed to be comfortable. I don't know. I'm growing more open to the idea that we're um this idea that you can have this great balance of a virtuous marriage, a fruitful marriage, but also not necessarily an easy marriage, but um a marriage where there isn't this constant moral suffering. I'm starting to think doesn't actually exist. I think that must just be part of the package. And if nothing else, I just want to warn people, let them know what they're getting into, and possibly help the priests, those that are hearing confessions, to maybe just go a little easier on people.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with you about the inevitability of suffering, and some of the heavier and more grim homilies this
Mhm.
Triduum definitely, kind of doubled down on suffering. But maybe to my for my taste and for my inclination, maybe a little too much. Like, there were definitely some sentences like, if you, the more you suffer, it's a sign that God really loves you and wants you to be a saint. And I always have mixed feelings with those kinds of sentiments because it can easily become warped to the point where you do make up your own cross instead of take up your cross, and there's almost, especially if you're maybe inclined towards scrupulosity or OCD, where you might you might get really uncomfortable when life starts to feel too joyful and too easy because maybe
Yeah,
you're straying from the path, you're straying from the narrow path.
yeah,
And I think there should be a healthy way where we can embrace certainly that life is difficult. We shouldn't completely avoid suffering, and through suffering, there's a lot of potential for growth. But it should be we should have tools to pace ourselves a little bit better. Kind of, yeah, I don't know, to bring back the gym analogy. I think you'd mentioned you do CrossFit, right? And I'm sure that there are days where especially if you're trying to level up your weights or reps, where it's gonna hurt physically, and
yeah.
maybe if you don't make certain goals, you're also gonna feel a little bit down in terms of your ego, or you didn't quite check the thing off. But at the same time, even with all those setbacks when you're at the gym, you don't feel like you're going to lose your soul eternally. But you might have to take time to sort of rethink and recalculate things, but then hit those reps harder next time, and hopefully you make your next big milestone. And if we could approach suffering in that way rather than the sense of constant guilt, shame, unworthiness, and anxiety about your soul, I think we could get more out of it, and you might empower more people to brace themselves for the suffering that inevitably comes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, having just come through Holy Week and stuff, I mean, here's the way if we did nothing but this and said, look, don't change any of the rules, so to speak, and don't, I guess, embrace this whole notion of suffering. But it's sort of like when Jesus was carrying the cross and he fell because he is, I mean, he's human. He was worn down, like he reached a breaking point and he fell, and then got up and started walking again. And at some point, Simon carried the cross for him. Um, was the falling under the weight of the cross a failure, so to speak? I think you could say that, right? I mean, but it certainly wasn't a reflection of his. It wasn't we don't pass a moral judgment on his failure to, you know, continue under the weight of the cross. He fell down because he's human. and he got back up and he walked. I think the biggest thing for me is always going to be, yeah, this is hard. This is our cross. We are going to fall and then get back up. Falling should not be a death sentence to your soul. Like that's, I think the thing that I keep coming back to is marriage, even under the best of circumstances, is a cross. It's difficult that you're going to fall, not because people are bad or hedonists or whatever, but just at some point it gets to be too much to carry and you fall.
Mm-hmm.
And let's model the way to the cross, and as opposed to, be looking to condemn anyone the moment they fall, regardless of how virtuously and wonderfully they've carried the cross the rest of the time. If all that matters is that one time you fell and you didn't get it remedied in time at the confessional and it's off, like none of that, there's zero value to all the other suffering you went through. I think I think the point of emphasis that I think the church needs to pick up on, and because I think I would have a much different attitude about things if we could at least acknowledge that falling under the weight of this cross is maybe not desirable, but it's not a moral death sentence. And I think that, but that's what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
If you listen to the sermons you talk about, it feels like no matter how good I am, I'm going to fall at some point in time, despite my best efforts. And unless I'm fortunate enough to get to confession, or God forbid I fall repeatedly and don't stop falling, that's going to be the end of my soul. That puts a lot of weight on people, and puts a lot of weight on marriages
Mm-hmm.
that I think is unnecessary and counterproductive.
Yeah, and it can also easily warp your idea of who God is and what your relationship with God
Yeah.
is.
Because then it
Yeah.
feels like God wants us to I mean, at some point, it feels like, I mean, whether God wants us to fail, or it's certainly predictable that everyone is going to fall under the weight of this cross. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
at some point, it's sort of like I don't know if you're a baseball fan, but when a baseball team gets off to a slow start, at some point you start looking at the manager, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whoever put this team together, and at some point in time, it feels a little bit like that when it's marriage. When you if you have a set of rules that literally no one other than the most extreme versions of people can follow, at some point you start to look at the manager, not the players, for not being able to perform.
That's a really good analogy. Yeah, I'm not super knowledgeable in baseball, but I definitely follow your point. And I think that also speaks to the psychology about how we approach the rules, that oftentimes in the church, if something doesn't work, it's always because the members of the congregation are just too sinful or too concupiscent to understand. And you're right, it's like we're never really permitted to question the manager class. It's
Yep.
sort of like the problem is always on our end.
Mhm.
And I think if it, maybe, I think we do all have to make a sincere effort to stay humble and to examine our conscience and examine our motivations for sure. But I think it can be taken to an extreme where it's like it gaslights us into never being able to trust our experiences and our intuitions. And that can be pretty crippling too.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. And I hope that maybe, I mean, things move slowly in the church, and if Francis was in fact the initiator of some um, gradual I don't know, growth or development of the church, um, try to be patient, because I know it's not going to happen in my lifetime. But at the same time, I'm like, this is my lifetime. Like
Hmm.
I and my kids are at that age where they're going to start getting married, and I'll be honest with you, there are days it's really hard for me to look at my kids, and if they say, "Hey, Dad, would you get married?" and whatever, I'll be like,
Yeah.
I don't know I honestly don't know what to tell
Mhm.
you. It depends on whether Father Rippinger is right. If Father
Yeah.
Rippinger is right, I would say no. If
Yeah.
Father Rippinger might be wrong, then probably. I think marriage is and can be a very wonderful I mean, I love being a dad. I mean, it's one of the greatest gifts in the world. Like I mean, I complain about it, but it is awesome. And
Mhm.
I never think about the things that I have given up to be a dad. I mean, I love it, but I'll tell you, if Father Ripperger's right about the moral consequences of some of these things, it's hard for me to say it's worth it. Like if it's hard for me to say that it's all worth it if I'm going to end up in hell when it's all said and done, and maybe most of my kids will. How do you? I don't know how I don't know how you reconcile. I can't reconcile my own experience with Father Ripperger. Not to keep picking on poor Father Ripperger,
Oh
but
no, you're singing my tune, buddy. I pick on that guy. I mean, God help me, I pick on that guy too much.
I can't reconcile the Father Ripperger approach to the world and my own lived experience, and in good conscience, tell someone that they should knowingly follow in my footsteps, so to speak, which is to marry young and start having kids right away.
Yeah.
I can't I couldn't in good conscience tell someone to do that.
And I think that in a way is very I think that's very telling because you're no longer just thinking about yourself and your selfish gain and your selfish pleasure and what you stand to,
Mhm.
achieve. You're actually thinking also from a place of empathy, which I think is a good testing method for anything, for
Yeah.
any topic. I think the strength of your sincere belief in any given thing, I think I think if you absolutely in your heart of hearts believe in the goodness of something, you should have no misgivings promoting it actively.
Yep.
But I think that hesitation, especially if it comes from a place of empathy and understanding, I think that does mean that there's some questions worth being asked about whatever the topic at hand is.
Yeah.
Because it's you're now your yeah, your idea and your motivation is so much more than just your selfish circumstances. It is about like how it affects other people.
Yeah, and my wife and I talk about this a lot, and I've talked about this in the past is, when I was um just leaving the seminary, finishing college, I was doing my college senior thesis on Humanae Vitae, and a still vividly remember it, a college professor of mine who was basically in my state, probably almost exactly my age now. I remember her just saying, "It is the church." What did she say? Um, if the church could offer something to those of us at this, we're done having children, but we're dealing with premenopause and menopause, and she just the pain in her eyes was apparent, and I realized that nothing has really changed since then, other than UCM exists now. I mean, I'm very very blessed to have people message me all the time or saying I was really very beaten down by all this, and it helps to know that we're not alone, and so I'm grateful for that. I'm very very I guess blessed that you and I, we found each other and good people in our community,
Mhm.
picking even Jonah 2.0, that we have this community that certainly didn't exist 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and maybe this will help some couple um, have a little better experience than I did.
Yeah, hopefully that's the hope, and I think you've really got the ball rolling in something pretty great.
I think so. It's pretty remarkable. It's very humbling. And I'm very blessed to have all of you guys in my life. So I don't expect to be going anywhere anytime soon. And I'm kind of excited for the future. This is one of the besides my family, this is one of the highlights of my life, quite honestly. I really, really like being part of this, whatever we have going on here.
Oh, that's great. We're happy to have you as our fearless leader. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe the next plan is if we can get all of the members in our community in a safe and secure place, we got to start outbreeding the trads.
Well, I've done my part.
Yeah, you have. You've set the bar. So I don't know how many of us can make it up to 9, but we'll see.
I keep winking at my wife on around peak day, and she's giving me the very very consistent stop sign and maybe some other
Mhm.
gestures with her fingers. That, but Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm I would say I'm more optimistic about the future of the church now than I was certainly when Pope Francis took over, and I don't know if that's because of him or in spite of him, but
Mhm.
I do have a certain level of optimism that I haven't necessarily had for quite some time.
Yeah. I wonder, well, part of it too is since Pope Francis back in 2013, I mean, yeah, the internet was pretty, you know, is far along, but I think in the last 12 years since Pope Francis, like the internet has exploded even more, and the opportunity for communication and the spread of information is like even exponentially greater. And
Mhm.
I think that does allow for more voices in the church like ours to perhaps enter the conversation in a meaningful way.
For sure. I mean, I think it's like I said, I think it's an amazing time to be alive, and maybe Jonah 2.0 is right. Maybe he'll shut it down, but I don't think so. Maybe Burke would. Maybe Burke
Mhm.
would tell me to shut her down, and if our Holy Father told me to shut her down, I guess um I'll shut her down. But I uh just just based on the message, I get a lot of messages that I don't share. I'm convinced that we've tapped into an element of the church that is there, and for pretty obvious reasons, people have been very, very afraid to come out publicly and acknowledge support. But I think we're going to be here, and I think we're playing a very important role in the future of the church.
It would be a really nice time if we could reach a place where none of us have to hide our faces for fear of the Inquisition, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and it is one of the great paradoxes because you know, the traditional church has a little bit of a persecution complex. I'm not saying there's absolutely no persecution, there is, but they often blow it out of proportion. But it's like the heretics like us that have to hide our faces. They're totally fine out in broad daylight.
Yeah, if I weren't afraid about a disciple of Taylor Marshall outing me and jeopardizing my ability to support for my family, I would come out. But those folks do worry me a little bit.
Yeah.
So for the time being, we'll be anonymous, and who knows, maybe I mean it does allow me to speak a little more freely.
Yeah,
Um
I think if you really showed your face,
mm.
on the Onan channel, I think you'd have to tone down the gay Christopher West jokes. I think that
Yeah,
might end your career.
I got okay, so I have to use a couple of Christopher West clips before we go, and you have to let me know
Yeah,
which one you like better, okay?
I
So,
got you.
this one I like a lot,
Pay attention to your pain. It's telling you something.
Okay.
and this is my all-time favorite. We're gonna wrap up with this one, and then
Yeah.
we're gonna call it a day, okay? So,
Alright, sounds good.
brace yourselves.
Well, of course, masturbation is awesome.
That was a masterpiece.
There was a little editing there. There was a little editing there, but,
It was convincing.
his
Mhm.
those are his words, not mine. Yeah, maybe the most, persuasive thing he's ever said. I don't know. We'll have to
Yeah. I think a couple of suggestions, if you should clip, you know, how he always says, "Oh, bless, bless," or "Mercy, mercy, mercy."
The,
That's
the beauty of
wow.
intimacy.
Yeah. Man, he is sounding pretty fruity. I mean, with all due love and respect, no judgment on the man's heart, but that is some pretty fruity stuff, man.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think as long as Christopher West is around, I think I'll
Mhm.
be around and whatever.
Yeah.
And so, but
You think you're gonna collect some Ellen Holloway clips to add to the mix, or is that too painful?
I'm scared. I actually scared of that woman a little bit. So I'm going
Oh, you
to.
mean like she might take action against your content?
I keep checking her podcast every week to see if she finally heard about us.
Mhm,
Well, she knows about us. I'm assuming she's forgotten about us,
mhm.
but and not to I it hurts me that she like her community and our community can't collaborate more. I tried really hard. I actually reached out to her before we started this, and we were just so far apart from we just weren't receptive to each other, I guess is the best way I could put it. But I would love nothing more than I think regular conversations between her community and our community would be very fruitful, far more fruitful than, let's say, Christopher West or Father Ripperger and all that. I mean, I think for better or for worse, the future is what you know is a post humani vitae, post theology of the body world, and it's kind of what do we do with that? Is I think what we're left with. So um I think we have to take the gains, move on from the losses, and try to craft a future that I think the church can and does have the something special to offer that is different than the rest of the world, but not the current mix. The current mix is just, I don't know.
Some
I
wacky stuff.
Yeah, that's just my own personal feeling. So I know there's probably some
Yeah.
people that love it, but
Yeah.
I
I
think
think I will continue to join your efforts and maybe also release some like reaction videos to her content and
yeah,
Christopher West content. Maybe I imagine the more those of us in your, in the Uncharted network kind of
mhm,
respond to their stuff and always, with humor, but with, with respect,
yep,
maybe
absolutely,
it'll draw enough attention to get them curious, but
yep,
as long as we don't offend them too much or they want to cancel us, but
yeah,
maybe if we can kind of just playfully poke at them until
mhm.
maybe we could inspire some good faith conversation down the line.
Sounds good. Amen to that.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Well, I'm gonna have to wrap it up. I It's been fun. Maybe we'll be back at it next week.
Yeah. Yeah,
Schedule.
let's keep in touch. I think it should work next week. We'll keep in touch about it. But yeah, I think the weekly Monday thing
Yeah,
it's a fun arrangement.
awesome. All right. Thank you, Midnight. Thank you, everyone who showed up in the comments. And until next time, everyone, have a good one.
All right.